I'm Paul Louis Metzger, the Director of the Institute for Cultural Engagement, New Wine, New Wineskins. Thank you for joining us for another episode of New Wine Tastings. New Wine is about building relational bridges through Jesus and contemporary culture, and New Wine Tastings is giving a taste of that. And we're dealing with the theme of advocacy and from a variety of angles. And one of the aspects to advocacy, I suppose it goes without saying, is conflict and conflict resolution. And to address that subject, we are going to be interviewing what I call him Chief, Chief Wall. Bob Wall was the former fire chief in Portland, Oregon, and also in Palo Alto, California. And I'm also here with Trudi Sang, pastoral leader in Tigard, Oregon, and pastoral leader Cody Whittington out in Montana. And we're going to be interviewing Bob on the subject of advocacy, knowing and expanding your conflict styles toolkit. Sounds like a Bob Dylan song. Again, I'll say it again, advocacy, knowing and expanding your conflict styles toolkit. And Bob, you know, you've been a mentor of mine for many years. You have been a big influence on my life, and you've really helped me grow in this particular area. You might not think I've grown, but I think I've grown in this area over the years. You know, conflict is inevitable in life. We can't get away from it. And I'm sure our pastoral leader friends here, Trudi and Cody, would agree that conflict is just the name of the game. It shows up in our families, with spouses, with children, with parents, with siblings, with friends, with parishioners, and beyond in our society. Anyone who serves as an advocate will certainly experience their fair share of conflict. It behooves an advocate to have a large toolbox, something you've said before, Bob. We have to have a large toolbox with a variety of tools for addressing conflict in it, if we want to engage and resolve conflict soundly. Bob, you've taught a great many people on this subject. As I said, you've already that you've done that with me. And I'm continuing to grow in this, trying to hone my skills, develop them in this area. You've also served as an advocate, especially in my experience, in the area of racialization, mediation, and the like. It's a real passion point, and it's part of your calling as a fire chief, brought into Portland when you were fire chief to diversify on matters of race, which wasn't an easy thing to do. As you said, there was a lot of nepotism in fire departments. You know, it was good enough for my dad and my uncle. It's good enough for me. Why do we have to diversify?
That's right.
So I'm indebted to you for your expertise, your counsel mentorship. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me. It's an honor to be here and to share in this. I think advocacy and conflict do share a lot of common ground. So.
Thank you, Bob. Now, what led you initially to have such an interest in the area of conflict styles and conflict resolution? There must have been something that triggered it.
Well, Paul, you and I have a lot of years together. That's the first time you've ever asked that question so pointedly. So, and I appreciate that. And I thought about it, and I think the first thing in that answer is war. I was born in 1941. It seemed like in my early childhood, that was a theme of reality. I remember the day that my dad left our family. I remember going to JCPenney's and buying him a little bag to carry all of his belongings in, just a little thing. And off he went. Beyond that, over my years, biblical teaching brought up time and again how Jesus modeled life and especially conflict, and how he shared a different view of conflict than what I saw in the world. And lastly, and I think most formatively, I was became interested in the whole issue of conflict as I became a leader at different levels. And unfortunately, I couldn't pass off the buck anymore. And so I was forced, I wasn't negotiated, I was forced to grapple with conflict, and because you just can't leave it alone and lead. You can, or if you leave it alone, pretty soon you will not be leading. So you are forced to deal with it. And so I kind of embraced it and dug into it, and asked questions and educated myself, and here I am.
And, we could add the Vietnam War. I know that that was certainly something in the back of your mind. I think what happened with the civil rights movement, I remember you sharing about how when you were in college, it still sticks with you. San Jose State,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Some of your fellow classmates were Olympians, and at least one or more of them were those who are on the podium receiving their awards with the Black Power fist. And
Tommy Smith, he was a classmate, and John Carlos, and others. So it was a far cry from where I grew up in Dallas, Oregon.
Which had its fair share of conflicts too, in a different way. And
it did. There was no people of color in our town. Zero.
And it may have been very intentional from what you told.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there was a written law, that you couldn't, if you're a person of color, you couldn't spend the night, which was called a sundowner town. So, and when I found that out in my teen years, it almost boiled over the feelings about how in the world could a town that I loved, treat people with that kind of exclusion, and like almost a hidden sign, you're out of here. So all those things were part of kind of honing that appetite for, how do we deal with this stuff called conflict? I grew up, I was the third child, and so I had to fight for my position and my point and my piece of the of the steak, and all of that. And so I learned to fight. I mean, that's the one tool, is you fight for it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's kind of the background. That's my background. I could go on for 4 hours, but that's it.
We only have 3, so
yes.
So and we'll involve Trudi and Cody as we proceed here. But how has your study and cultivation of skill in conflict resolution and mediation helped you personally and professionally, including your work as a fire chief, as I alluded to earlier, in Palo Alto, California, and Portland, Oregon, two very different cities, and as an executive pastor of a large church in the Portland suburbs. So how has it helped you, Bob?
Well, it helped me, and I think it helped me to see myself, helped me to see where God continued to plant me and use me within. You mentioned some of the organizations, and it doesn't matter which organization it is. You're going to have conflict, and so I often say, because I was taught, I understood, I learned that if an organization is going to be healthy, it has to uh, it has to address conflict and not avoid or suppress conflict. So I often share something that I've learned, and that is that conflict needs to be addressed as mining that conflict for the good or the gold that is there. And I think that's a good metaphor because that's dirty work, it's hard work, and if you avoid the signals of conflict, it's not going to go away. It's going to erode your organization or your relationship, and sooner or later it will boil over. As another metaphor, it will or destroy your organization, and so that's the truth. I also think that I learned that it is key, not to, as a leader or even a small team of leaders, to hold things really close, as opposed to expanding the team and the input and the considerations and the information so that conflicts can be resolved, and in the resolution of conflicts, your organization actually becomes healthier. Maybe another view of it is even the human body and the doctors in our life. If a doctor once said to me, healing starts when I can really listen to my patient. When I start listening to my patient, then healing starts. And I'm going, wow, how do I apply that to leadership? Progress or productivity or transformation actually starts when people start listening to each other. And I'm still learning to listen, and I think that's really a key. Even as we talk here today about advocacy, maybe I can even share a little bit more about that.
Well, thank you, Bob, and we'll allow for our colleagues to engage what you've said here in a second. I just wanted to say that point about doctors is, dealing with a major crisis related to my son's traumatic brain injury and the aftermath of that. And it's in so many different domains that it spreads to. And I've been doing a series on medical ethics with Dr. Robert Potter, who spoke to a variety of contexts for New Wine and the like over the last several years. And one of the things he said in a recent interview was that so often in the medical community, and he's a doctor and medical ethicist by background, he said the statistics show, or study shows, that after 13 seconds, the medical professional is already interrupting the patient. And he said that's deeply disturbing to him. And so your point is that healing starts when the doctor is listening is almost counterintuitive. And it's the same thing for a pastor or for a theologian.
Yes.
How well are we dialoguing? How well are we listening? You said to hold things loosely, not that we aren't after pursuit of resolution, but we've got to open it up so we can move toward resolution. Cody and Trudi, any thoughts on that? Does that stand out to you about holding our positions somewhat loosely in terms of mediation and conflict resolution? Thoughts?
Well, I guess the one concept that you mentioned that we should mine for the the conflict for gold. And I was just wondering if you could maybe unpack that a little more and just describe it. I mean, it's very visual, but how does that kind of look in your context?
Okay, let me just say, let's say you're leading, maybe you have an executive team, and you're dealing with a significant issue. And for just off the top of my head, let's say it's now. And so whatever our organization is, it's being impacted negatively by the events of the last year. And economics is, we're just holding on our organization with economics. We're just holding on to our customers. We're not sure whether we can even survive. And our team is talking, and we're trying to figure out, okay, so what do we do next? What do we do next? And so the big leader of the team says, I think we ought to go here, 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 and here. And everybody goes, yeah, good idea, good idea. And somebody else says, no, that's not it. There's something missing. There's something missing. And I don't know what it is, but it's missing. And so we have a choice then, all in the circle, we have a choice, either to listen to that, no, that's, or we might call it the naysayer or whatever it is, and it's a conflict. Somebody says no to the yes, let's move forward. So instead of minimizing that point, we say, tell us more. Tell us more. What are you feeling? What's going on? What do you hear from others in the organizations that are not in our circle? What are people saying? And if we do what we're suggesting, what's the negative impact? And you said, and the person will tell us, and it could be, it's going to kill us. It's going to ruin our organization. And we would say, how? And all at once, there's more to it. And all at once, we start to see, that would drive people away, our customers away. Our mission, it changes our mission. It becomes a problem that will destroy us. And so that's the gold in the mining the no or the conflict for something nobody else sees. But I think our biblical principles bring that out pretty well. As that when you shine light on the issue, you see it differently or more clearly. And in some ways, you're mining for truth. And once we get the whole truth, then we can make a good decision.
I appreciate that. We're not mining a conflict to get our way. We're mining it for truth, which is beyond us all.
Yeah, yes, that's true. That's true.
Cody, thoughts that you have? Any response initially to what Chief Bob is sharing with us? Chief Wall?
Sure. Bob, in my context, we spend a lot of time trying to build bridges across deep differences, especially in the political area right now. My context is pretty split down the middle. We have a good part of our community that is on the left, a good part of the community that's on the right, and they all show up to church on Sundays. And at our church, we dialogue on a weekly basis. And we've run into several, I would say, moderate conflicts. I don't think we've had any major ones that have divided the church at this point. But in navigating conflict, you've touched on mining the gold, being a listening presence, things that we often see in Jesus. One question I have that if you're able to expound upon a little bit is, how do you handle the relationship when one or more individuals don't get their desired outcome in the conflict, when they may not feel like the gold was mined, but maybe perhaps they were they found more coal than gold on the other end of the resolution. How can you remain an advocate for people like that and maintain that relationship?
That's a good question. Let me, and in fact, when I and conflict and advocacy add complexity to the situation, because an advocate in a conflict resolution role is it's not different, but it's more complex. They become more complex. So so I think the answer is we need to look deeper, and deeper than just conflict styles and conflict resolution. But, you know, there's 5 conflict styles. One is, you know, force, you know, win, and that's the one most of us learn as a child. You know, where'd you going to? It's mine. I'm going to pull on whatever it is until I get it mine. You get older, you fight. You fight, you win. We learn that playing games and all. The other, so that's kind of like we hammer away at someone till we get our way. And so when we use that style, there's going to be some people that lose. When we negotiate or kind of split the pie, that's another style. Well, you take half, I'll take half. And then there's some people, well, I didn't get half. Okay. There's another way, which is to collaborate, and everybody, you know, works on something that we don't see. And maybe we didn't go far enough when they didn't get what they felt the organization really needed. Okay. And in collaboration, the reason we don't use that is because it takes too long. You know, it does. It takes a long time to really dig and see something that none of us saw before. And so I call that when the light really comes on, it's a better solution for everybody than the position that people are not getting, and the position that is kind of moving as the majority position. Okay. So if you have the time, that's what you need to do. But in advocacy, and I'm glad I'm here because it's made me think about advocacy, because advocacy is a tough one, because in an advocacy, we usually pick one person and we're on their side. And I'll almost move over. We're on their side. And that becomes almost a problem in and of itself. As opposed to a mediator, I'm not on anybody's side, and let's work out a resolution that fits for everybody, or most everybody, and then it goes on from there. So I think it's a signal when people say, wait a minute, we didn't, you know, we feel like we didn't get what we wanted on this thing. I mean, it's a signal that says you're not done yet. And we need to listen for that. Okay, and it's, I have a simple metaphor, which I learned many years ago. And a friend of mine was an auto mechanic, and He was an old guy. He was way old. I think he was probably 45 years old. So he was way old. And I brought my car to him, and there was a noise in the engine. And he just sat on the fender and listened and listened and listened. And I said, "What do you think?" And he goes, "I don't know." And then he pulled out a long screwdriver. I mean, it's the longest screwdriver I've ever seen. And I've never seen one like that. You know, no one would pick that up to do. And he put it on the engine, and then he put his ear on the end of the screwdriver. And then he would move it to another place, another place, another place, until he could hear over the sound of the engine exactly where that sound, where that ticking or clanking or whatever it was sound was. And then he says, "That's our problem." And so in our context here, advocacy, et cetera, sometimes I don't think we really know the problem until we radically, or as a group, listen. And so that's my short answer to your question.
Thank you for that response. It sounds like for that dynamic, it's almost as if the cooperation in the process is just as important as the ultimate outcome.
Even sometimes more important, because if you're going to come away without relationship, if we do what we do, and some part of the relationship is destroyed, that will haunt us forever.
Thank you.
You know, as part of this series, we're going to be interviewing Pastor Jim Sequeira. Bob, I think you've met
Yes.
Jim. You may know Jim. And,
Yes. Yeah.
you know, he's really concerned for community, not simply causes. And he's very much about justice and the like. But
Right.
as a native Hawaiian pastor, he's very concerned for community and that we frame our causes relationally. You know, I think the idea of being a learner, being about building community, if that shapes us, we're going to be about process, because it's about this ongoing building of a relationship. And I think that if I have a desire to really get to know someone in the midst of resolving a conflict, and sometimes these things, you know, we don't have that kind of time, depending on the situation. If there's a conflict and someone's in an emergency room, they have to operate.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they can't pause. It depends on the context,
Right.
but if we're talking about a situation where we could take more time to process, that idea of how a process can be even more important at times, because it's about the relationship or building of relationships. That's key. What Jim's about, what you're about, what we're about here. And so what do you see as the various conflict tools available to us? And I'm going to repeat what I heard you say, because we've talked about them before and you've already alluded to a few of them. One is, you know, just really win, conquer. You said we grow up with that kind of mindset in place. Some of us never grow out of it. Sometimes there's compromise. Sometimes there's avoid conflict. Collaboration, you just said that is the rare one. It's very hard because it takes so much time. It takes skill. It takes good listening skill, relational skill, etc. So you've mentioned some of those already. Maybe unpack them just a bit more.
Okay.
Delve into them.
Okay. Well, force is you know, kind of the tool of the hammer. You know, you just bang on everything until you get it done. To compromise is like split the pie, and so that is you know, you slice everything up equally. You know, so everybody gets exactly the same. Sometimes your legal remedies will do that. They just divide everything by n. You know, how many people we're talking about. Accommodate is one that kind of seems like it's a weak skill. But accommodate means, okay, Paul, I've heard you. I want this, you want that, and so I'm going to give it to you. I want our relationship more than I want this, and so here I'm going to accommodate for, not for myself, but for the relationship. That's more important than $50. And so here's the $50. To withdraw means I'm out of here. I'm leaving. I'm not going to negotiate. I'm not going to do. I'm just leaving. And that's actually a good thing to do when it's no longer safe. And actually, it's one I think that doesn't get employed often enough, because pride gets in the way, and we stay until we have no other choice but to fight, shoot, kill, war, whatever. And then, of course, the last one is collaborate, and that is to work for a third alternative, let's just say, that nobody's seen before. I want to go a little bit deeper, because with each tool, actually, there's a strategy. And one is to win. Obviously, that goes, to a couple of them, but equality also shows up in a couple. So the strategy, that relationship strategy, is a piece that you have to employ as you decide which tool you're going to use. Safety, and to build something better is a piece that needs to be employed by the advocate, by the mediator, all the time. And so I could go on. There's a bit more for the purpose of time, and as advocates and advocacy, I've learned, and I'm learning, that there's more to this whole issue than a group of leaders trying to figure out the best thing, or two people that are at each other, and we're trying to resolve that. But there's a three-part piece, when I call them the roles, different roles. And one is the victim, obviously, and that one is the needy, the person in need, or they can't speak for themselves, or the patient, or whatever it is. It's the victim. The other is a persecutor. That's one that is bringing the pain and the difficulty. It could be say no, or whatever it is, or but there's a person whose role is causing the problem. He's the problem person, and the other is a rescuer. And you would say, oh, great. Okay, we got styles, conflict resolution styles. Good deal. Let's pick one of those, and we got to figure out who's the victim, who's the prosecutor, who's the rescuer here, and we're going to come out good in this whole thing. What the reality is, we all start changing or interchanging those roles: victim, persecutor, and rescuer at different times in the process. And so we need to watch out who's playing the victim now, who's playing the rescuer now, and who's playing the persecutor now. And all of those dynamics are going to show up. And from my reading, they show up pretty interestingly in advocacy. They don't show up as much when we have a mediator and two problems, so I think that is a piece of the reality that we need to keep in mind. So I'll stop there, and then I don't want to overload y'all.
Well, just, there was one particular situation in the past where you and I were brought in a sense, to mediate. And
Yes.
it was a matter pertaining to racial issues,
Yes.
diverse groups.
Yes.
And one, depending on how one looks at it, I'm not saying this is accurate, but I'm just saying, in light of your language that you just gave, victim,
Yes. Yes.
victimizer and such,
Yes.
there's a sense at times where, a party or a group of people or an individual can be victimized and then want to gain the upper hand, in a sense, not necessarily to victimize back, but to gain victory over, and it's one hammer versus another. If they
Yes.
don't feel that they're being heard, they're going to come back strong. And I think there should be some appreciation for, that's not strong arming, but saying, no, we are going to confront. I think there's a need for that.
Yeah.
However, what we were asked to do is to come in and mediate as advocates, in a sense, advocate for hopefully all parties to come together to collaborate. And by the grace of God, collaboration did take place.
Yes.
And one individual said to me later that they were grateful for what we had done, and it really built a profound relationship between two individuals.
Yeah.
And that said, it wasn't easy, and
Yes.
it's hard, especially if you have people who, at the end of the day, really want to fight. And how do you work through that? But you've shared with me that many of us have one primary conflict tool in our box, and you said that when we're kids, we're often thinking, it's my toy, give it back to me. I suppose that depends based on what you shared with me in the past, because you've never framed it quite like that. I think you would say that, let's just say as adults, there are some people who are going to be more prone to avoid conflict or withdraw from conflict.
Yes.
Others who are going to compromise or accommodate. Others who will be confront and conquer. Hard to find someone who's really skilled at collaboration. My tool, you said to me, was the little kids tool. You didn't call it that, but I guess that's what you were thinking. Early on, when you started mentoring me on conflict styles and resolution, you said, your predominant model or type is conquer. Now,
Yes.
I hadn't thought that, but I guess you had seen it in action. But I think for us, one of the things that shows up here is that when we're under stress, you said this to me, when we're under stress, our predominant model will surface.
Yes.
So if we're under stress, we might avoid. We don't know it until the stress is on. And I have to watch myself a lot these days with what's going on with my son's situation, because the stress is on all the time, almost all the time. And it's very easy for me to fall back on something that's more second nature to me, which is to conquer.
Yes.
Which, I may win something, but I won't have any long-term gains generally. It's not a tool you want to use all the time. At times you have to, if it's to save someone from a grave danger. When you're a firefighter, you couldn't dialogue, with an individual on the second floor in a burning house. You can say, well, what should we do? You had to conquer the situation. You had to go in and just, whether they wanted to leave or not, whether they wanted to leave, you dragged them out. That was conquer.
Yes.
But most of our situations are not burning buildings.
That's right.
And so that's something we have to account for. It requires the greatest amount of skill to go about collaboration. let me ask you this. How would you encourage people as advocates,
Yes.
advocating for another party, advocating
Yeah.
for all parties, advocating for oneself, to cultivate these different tools? And this is just to whet people's appetites. And also, as much as possible, to develop the skill of pursuing collaboration.
Okay. That's a good question. You know, that's what I hate about you. You know, you're too smart. You know, and so you ask these.
I'm not smart enough, to be quite frank.
Gosh. So it is a profound question. You know, how do you decide? You know, which to choose, how to choose this style or adaptation, etc. So it's a little tongue in cheek, and I said, well, that's when you call me. You know, well, that's when you call me. You know,
And I've done that.
yeah, right. From cooking beans, you know, in a microwave. You know.
Yeah, I remember that one.
So I'm being humorous. That's when you call me, but I'm also being very, very serious. Spiritually, God gives us a heart and a soul and feelings that are like hooked together somehow. I don't know how he did that, but he created us with all these feelings. And the feelings, in this case, when the feelings get really tough and it seems like you don't know which way to turn, ask for help. Ask an old person, okay, and ask an old woman, ask an old man who has experienced life, you know, to take a view of what's going on. And I say that seriously because, you know, I just turned 80 years old.
You and Bob Dylan.
In January, yeah. And all that means is that I have seniority of some kind. That's all. It doesn't mean anything else, except that it means that I have experience and maybe I can see things differently than you can see. So call somebody in and say, take a look at this. You know, what do you think? What do you see and what do you feel is going on? I think if you're going to be a good advocate or even have an advocacy ministry or a conflict resolution ministry, you're going to have to call people other than yourself every once in a while, just to get a view. So that's, and why would you call them? And I believe that you're looking for a radical listener, somebody that will listen with the earbuds in, you know, will listen deeper than you and I can listen. And I think God, you know, spiritually, God does that. We go to him on these situations, but also to people in our circle. And biblical principles play that out. Remember when, was it Moses who was overwhelmed with the problems in the backcountry, right? And his father-in-law, I think it was his father-in-law,
Jethro.
Jethro, he came and he says, what in the heck are you doing, man? You know, you killing yourself. And they go, what do you mean? He says, you can't do all that. Assign people, you know, to answer some of these questions, and you deal with only the ones that nobody else can deal with, that you have to deal with. And so I think that's my answer to it. We learn all of these pieces, you know, which skill to apply to resolve conflict, to be a good advocate. And then there's times when you need to ask for help. You just need to ask for help.
You know, you jokingly said before, I'm too smart. I think our problem often...
Yes, that was a joke.
I know. Our problem often is that we do think we're too smart. We don't need help. And I've been very grateful for the number of people, even with my son's situation, I've been able to call upon. You know, I draw from you all the time in my thinking through things. Okay, Paul, here's your dominant model under stress surfacing, and that's not going to affect the long-term change you want. And so how to move forward. But I have drawn from a variety of people to know how to approach the matters I'm dealing with. And I can do a better job of it. But I think looking at people who are leaders who've been able to bring people together in effective ways would be those you're wanting to draw from.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at someone who's left, you know, clean up in aisle 3, after aisle 4, after aisle 5, probably not the person you want to look to. They might be seen as a take charge leader, but they're not necessarily affecting long-term change.
Right.
After long-term effective change, be looking carefully for people who are really skillful at leading in a way that they bring on more people and bring about more effective change in the long run than others. Those are the ones you want to look to most, not necessarily the flamboyant, the charismatic, the most gifted, the way we normally think of gifting. In those ways that I just alluded to. Cody and Trudi, any closing thoughts you have as we're near the end of our time for just this session? Thoughts, impressions that you have?
You know, I think the common thread that seems to have bookended this entire conversation is that of listening.
Yeah.
And you know, of course that's what you might call biblical. But it's so counterintuitive and so countercultural right now that I think it is the best starting place and landing spot for what we're dialoguing about. So I appreciate your emphasis, and I have written down your quote, radical listener. Typically what follows after radical is not quietness. And so I really appreciate that.
That's right.
Trudi?
Yeah, and I like the comment that you said about emotions, because I was going to ask you that and you actually addressed it. Because when you're passionate about something, especially when it's somebody or something that you're really attached to or really invested in, really keeping our emotions intact and not leaning into those more destructive kinds of relationship, where we could end up having a lesser relationship and long-term result. I appreciated that comment.
Yeah. I don't know what we're really building beyond, with the course, et cetera, but I assume we're building people who want to be advocates, in the true sense of the word. And I think there's a beauty to that, and there's a hazard to that as well. That position of being an advocate for someone else, you're in bed with them and their struggle and their need and their situation, and you can so as advocates, let's be careful that you don't get so so tunnel visioned on that person and their needs and wants and desires that you don't no longer see the whole picture. And it's even what's the real problem here?
Mhm.
So sometimes your advocate is going to have to change hats from one to the other to be able to see what's really there. Not an easy thing to do. In fact, Paul, when you invited me to be in this situation, I thought, oh, cool. You know, that's good. I'm happy to talk about conflict. I've got a ton of notes in my brain and, all of that sort of stuff. However, what happened was there's a conflict in my own life, right here today, that I was able to see with a different set of eyes, because I started to dig into, gee, what questions are they going to ask me? What's the real issue? And so I'm seeing things in my own life just because God said, well, what are you going to say? What are you going to say to Paul and to Trudi and to Cody? And that wasn't the issue at all. That's what God was saying to me is, why don't you listen to yourself and apply whatever I tell you to say to your own situation.
Well, Bob, that's one of the things I
That's
appreciate.
a gift. That's a gift.
And one of the things I really appreciate about you is that you're a learner. I think, radical listening and radical learning go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And what we think is the issue, even with advocacy, we might find that there's a lot more underneath the surface as we mine conflict for gold. And so we need to always be learning, always be listening, and never see ourselves as having arrived. And I thank you that even at 80 years of age, you're still learning and listening. That's amazing, Bob. You and Bob Dylan, Bob Wall, Bob Dylan. So thank you, Bob, for joining Trudi, Cody, and me here at New Wine Tastings, Bob Wall. And thank you, Bob. Thank you, Trudi and Cody, and all of you, as we seek to be radical learners, radical listeners in pursuit of conflict resolution as advocates. Bless you all. Goodbye.
Wow.